Hey, ADHDer, have you ever read the same page at least 3 times and still couldn't explain what you read? Please hear me. This is not a lack of intelligence. This is our struggle with working memory at play. And in episode 332 of the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast, I'm sharing 5 powerful learning strategies to finally make what you study stick. Let's get into it. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you? Today, we are diving into a really important topic that I'm hoping will be especially helpful for those of you in school, given we are nearing the end of the semester. But also, please know that what we're talking about today is applicable to literally anyone at any time who wants to learn something new. And I mean, let's be real, that's basically all of us in the Busy Awesome community since we love learning all the things. Now, this episode, it was inspired by a question I got over on YouTube the other day, which, by the way, if you are a YouTube watcher and you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I would love to hang out and hear your thoughts, your questions in the episode comments. I always love hearing from you. Anyway, like I mentioned, I got this great question on episode 325, which was all about working memory. And to basically recap what they said, they asked if I had any episodes or content around how they can retain what they're reading when the working memory drops it. And this question was so helpful because it helped me realize I don't actually have a specific episode dedicated to this topic, and decided that needed to change immediately. Because, as I mentioned, whether we are in school or not, I know with certainty that a lot of us do struggle with learning and retaining new information because of our struggles with working memory. Now, in my examples, in episode 325, I had explained that during grad school, I would sit down, I'd try and read an article, and it didn't matter how many times I read it, I could not remember the content. I would read it over and over and over, and I swear it was like I hadn't read a single word. It was just gone. And I had so much shame around this because I didn't have my ADHD diagnosis at the time. So, of course, my brain just came to the logical conclusion that I was too stupid to understand. My brain was like, what other reason could it be? You clearly must be too stupid. It was super fun in my head at that time, let me tell you. In fact, I'm curious, do you relate to this in terms of reading a whole page and nothing sticking? If so, let me know in the comments. I'm curious how many of you can relate. If you can, I want to reinforce over and over, because this was such a hard one for me to get in my brain, this is not about intelligence. Okay, this struggle to remember is about the ADHD brain's struggle with working memory. Now, I like to think about working memory, generally, a bit like the brain's Post-it note for holding short-term information. Okay, so our working memory, it helps us hold on to those items, like a fact or a concept that you just read, or maybe a set of numbers somebody told you, or that person's name they literally just said out loud. And our working memory is that Post-it note, and it can hold that information for as long as we need it in that moment. At least that is true for the person who does not struggle with working memory. Okay, that's the case for a lot of non-ADHD brains who have the Post-it note brand sticky note, the super sticky ones. As ADHD brains, however, a lot of us have that generic sticky note that has been used 14 times. It has no stick at all, okay? They're just not nearly as sticky. So those facts and those concepts that we read, those names we just heard, it does not stick nearly as long. And so today, what I want to do is share 5 strategies that do help make studying and learning stick, whether it's preparing for exams or reading a briefing for work, or you just want to learn something new because your brain loves to learn. And then after we talk about those 5 strategies, we're going to look at a few personalized learning approaches based on the 4 different overwhelm types, whether you're the lion, the gazelle, the turtle, or the chameleon, so you can apply those strategies that work best for your brain as well. Now, as a side note, if you have no idea what I'm talking about when I just talked about overwhelm types, be sure to check out my free quiz. You can discover your unique ADHD overwhelm type and the best supports for your brain to help you move through the overwhelm and into action. You can take that quiz at I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/quiz. And then when we get to the section of the episode where we talk about the different types and the best strategies to learn for you, you'll be able to apply it as well. Okay, so let's get into it. We'll start with those 5 core strategies. And again, go take that quiz. I'm busybeingaawesome.com/quiz. Figure out your overwhelm type, and then you can apply the next strategies that we talk about too. So 5 core strategies first. These are great for all the different types. I also want to mention that with these 5 that we're going to look at, you can use them independently. So you could just choose one of them, give it a try. And also, you'll find as we go through the 5 that they build on one another really well too. So if you want to use one of the strategies, amazing. If you want to pair a couple of them together, or you want to use them to build on one another, that's incredible too. As always, pick what feels most supportive for you and leave the rest behind. So strategy 1, I call it teach it back. So when it comes to teach it back, the general idea is that you first read a small section, maybe a paragraph or something, maybe up to a page, depending how dense the content is. But you read a short section, and then after you finish reading that section, pause and literally explain out loud what you just read in your own words, like you're teaching it to someone else. So as an aside, I think one of the best ways to truly learn any type of information is by teaching it to someone else. It's such a powerful approach. And this is essentially a smaller scope of that, where we're just taking a paragraph, maybe a page, and putting it into our own words and teaching it out loud. So here's why this approach is so effective. Essentially, when we take the time to speak that content out loud in your own words, it's making your brain identify and ensure that you do clearly understand the content in an accessible way. And this ultimately then strengthens your comprehension and helps us to really simplify and connect the steps, because we have to think it through in a way that someone else might understand. So the way that you can do this, again, read a small section, 1 paragraph is plenty, and then close the book or look away from the screen or what have you, and then teach it back. Keep it short, 1 or 2 sentences, but talk about what you just read. And if you feel stuck, if this feels weird, here are a couple of prompts that I like to use to help me do this practice. So I might say, well, the big idea is, and then explain what I just read, or this really matters because ... or essentially the message here is blah, 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 or one example is ... and fill that in, okay? So these are all different prompts that you can use after you read the section to help you start talking about what you just read. So where are you supposed to do this? Well, you could pull up your phone and talk to your phone, do a voice memo. You could literally talk to your pet or a plant. You could hop on Zoom with a study buddy, or maybe get together in person if you're on a campus or something to study with a friend and talk it out. You could do a blank doc and use voice to text or something, pull up a Google Doc. Maybe you take a software engineering approach, you explain it to a rubber duck. Whatever you do, where you do the teaching, it's much less important than the actual act of doing the teaching. So what I would offer here is to simply choose the option that feels like the least amount of friction and give that a shot. And then the last thing that I'll offer around this first strategy is around how often to do it. I would say if it's a really dense text, I would aim for every paragraph. So you read the paragraph, then teach it back. Read the next paragraph, teach it back. For lighter reads, maybe you do every page, or make a guideline for yourself always before you turn the next page. So maybe you have 2 pages worth. And if you find that you've read a paragraph and you can't seem to explain the idea or the concept succinctly, to me, when I run into that, it just means that the section's too big, so I need to shrink it down, maybe to 3 or 4 sentences, okay? So do it as often as you need. I would say at least as often as every 2 pages, but maybe as frequently as every 3 or 4 sentences. Whatever feels most accessible for you, so that you really feel like you're understanding and grasping the concepts when you're explaining it back in your own words. Okay, so that's strategy number 1. Strategy 2 is adding anchors. So with adding anchors, we're basically leaving ourselves these little markers, these breadcrumbs, so that we don't lose the thread of what we're reading. And as I mentioned earlier, this can be a great pairing with the first strategy of teaching it back. So after finishing a small section of what you read, whether that's a paragraph or a page, again, depending on how dense the content is, how familiar you are with the content, what I encourage you to do is pause and then capture that main idea with a quick anchor. And that anchor could be a single word, it could be a short phrase, maybe a sentence, it could even be a symbol, just something to give your brain a hook, a reminder of what it's about when you come back later. Now, here's why this helps. So, as we know, our working memory slips pretty quickly. But when we write down a word or a phrase, we basically give ourselves this external memory system instead of asking our brain to carry it indefinitely. So these anchors, they are there as that little reference, so your brain doesn't have to hold it. It also creates kind of a quick map of the material, which then makes it easier to review later without having to reread the entire thing. So let's say you're reading about executive functions, okay? So maybe the first section you read about working memory, and you write down an anchor that says working memory equals brain post-it. And then you get to the second section on time blindness, and you write time blindness equals now or not now. And then you get to impulse control, and you write down race car engine with bicycle brakes, something like that, right? You write down these little cues to remind your brain of the core concept. Now, where do you keep these anchors? You can do it wherever feels best for you, whatever's the least amount of friction. So it could be in the margin of the book or the article if you're comfortable writing in said book, certainly in the article if you've printed it out, or if you're using GoodNotes or Notability or whatever on your tablet. You could do a sticky note attached to the page if you don't want to write in the book, if it's not your book or something, or I know some people just don't like writing in books. I'm a book writer. Anyway, it could be in the Notes app on your phone or on your computer. If you're into PKM, personal knowledge management in the digital space, you could use it in the PARA method with Tiago Forte's approach, or if you're an Obsidian person, you might love Mike Schmidt's approach. I'll link to both of their work in the show notes if you're interested more in the PKM space. The key takeaway with whatever you use, whether you're literally writing it in the book or you have a whole Obsidian database for all of your book notes, the key takeaway is to choose one approach and then stick with it for a while. Our brains usually want to jump to the next novel thing. I have a podcast episode about this. I can't remember the number, but I'll link to it in the show notes. Our brains often want to kind of jump from one new thing to the next, especially if we ever hit a bit of friction. And what I want us to do here, the invitation, is to choose one approach and stick with it for a little while. Put a container of time around it, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month, and then see what's working and not. We can't establish a successful system that works for us if we don't give it time for that system to unfold and for us to figure out the friction points and solve for them. So choose that approach, stick with it for a couple of weeks, again, maybe a month, put a container of time around it. And then at the end of that container, you can assess what's working, what's not, and make adjustments. So next time you have something new to try, a new adjustment, and you can continue the iteration process that way. Now, how often do we use anchors? Similar to what I said with the teach it back strategy, I like to do it for basically every paragraph if it's pretty dense content, and then every page if the reading is lighter. Now, it also depends on the reason that you're reading this material. I'm speaking right now, if I'm thinking about college students getting ready for exams or something, you may have to just kind of know all of the main content, so you're reading it to be able to pass the exam or whatever, and you're trying to study in that way. Now, if you're reading something just because you want to learn more about it, let's say you picked up a book on something and you want to read about it, then you certainly don't need to do anchor words and teaching back every single section. Instead, I would do it on the things that are most interesting to you. Okay, the areas that you really want to learn. Okay, so from there, we move to strategy 3, which is using multiple senses to help us learn. So this strategy is all about giving our brain extra pathways to help process information. Instead of just reading the words on the page, we help our brain by giving another sense to take it in, whether it's speaking, listening, moving, drawing, color coding. Each new pathway that we introduce to help us take in the information can help strengthen the memory so it's less likely to slip away. So ADHD brains often benefit from this kind of multi-sensory learning because we're not just relying on one single channel, for example, just our eyes to learn something. When we add in sound or movement or additional visuals, we basically create multiple hooks that make it easier to recall the information later. And then we're layering in senses, which keeps the process more engaging and less likely to feel flat or boring because we're not just reading, we're also color coding or sketching out what we just read, or we are using brain.fm with focus music to help keep the brain engaged as we're learning. All right, so that was strategy 3. Strategy 4 is doing active recall breaks. So this strategy with active recall breaks is where we stop our reading and break to quiz ourselves on what we just read. So instead of going back and kind of rereading the same things over and over and over to try and just drill it into our mind, we instead close the book or look away from the screen and try and pull what we just read from memory. And we check it, see if we got it right, what we missed, what have you. Is this hard? Oh my gosh, yes. And it's such good practice for all brains, and certainly for our ADHD brains. So this retrieval practice, again, it's both powerful and challenging for our brains. Be gentle with yourself as you explore it, but it's so helpful because when we reach into our memory, it's basically like giving your brain a really good workout. You're starting to lift some heavier weights and you're strengthening that pathway of remembering each time you practice it. So this is, again, different than rereading, which can seem productive, but it usually just doesn't help with that long-term retention nearly as much. So the way you do this, read a short section, close the book or look away from what you're reading, and then recall either out loud or you write down everything you can remember. And then look back to check yourself, right? So maybe you're reading something for work and you just finished, you go, okay, hold on, let's recall. What were the top 3 recommendations from this section of the report? Okay, challenge your brain to try and remember. Now, your brain might be asking, what's the difference between active recall and teach it back? Aren't they kind of the same? They are sort of, but there are a few core elements that really make them distinct from one another and actually allow them to build on one another as well. So the first strategy we talked about, teach it back, that's where we explain the material to someone else, either real or imagined, right? But the focus here is to make the idea really clear and understandable and put it in your own words. So this is really helping us strengthen comprehension, and it challenges us to essentially simplify and connect all the different concepts. Active recall, on the other hand, is more about quizzing ourselves without any type of prompting. So this is really just a sole focus on retrieving information from our memory. So this is that heavy lift. It strengthens the retention and ultimately makes the recall a bit easier in the future. So often the active recall comes first and then teaching back can come on top of that. So we can really combine them. So maybe you first recall everything that you just read without looking, and then you teach it back. You recall out loud, but putting it in your own words. And then you can go back and check your notes to fill in any gaps. So that sequence, that combination gives you double the benefit of both the retention of trying to literally recall what you read, and then the deeper comprehension as you put it in your own words to describe it to someone else. And then we get to strategy 5, which is distributed practice. What is this? Basically, distributed practice means revisiting the material that you've learned over time instead of cramming it all at once. Yes, I'm talking about doing a little bit at a time, not just cramming, short refreshers, a few minutes here and there instead of those long marathon sessions. I know that this goes completely against our ADHD brains. Stick with me. Don't go anywhere. I have some things to say about this, but this is the main idea, okay? So, think of it like watering a plant. If you water it a little bit each week as it needs it, it will stay alive. But if you just dump a gallon on it once a month, it's probably not as effective, okay? Ask me how I know. That's how I used to try and take care of plants. Anyway, so here's why doing a little bit at a time helps, and again, why it's tricky. So many of us are thoroughbreds. We dive in, we live in the now. It's either now or not now. So we do the now, and we have a really hard time kind of spreading things out a little bit at a time. With that being said, if we can put scaffolds in place, whether it's reminders, or you have a study session with body doubling, or you pair a review session with something you already do, when we can put in some of those scaffolds, it makes the smaller check-ins quite a bit more doable. And once we can start doing that, each of those little revisits interrupts our forgetting curve, and it helps that information stick around for the long term. So as I was reflecting on my own experiences while still in the world of academia, as I prepared for this episode, I realized how clearly this final strategy, this fifth strategy, played out between my time as a grad student versus when I was a professor. And it was just built in. It wasn't deliberate choice, let me tell you. Again, I hadn't had my diagnosis yet. But when I was in grad school, the material that I was cramming for, or trying to just learn all the things all at once, honestly, most of it kind of slipped away right after the deadline, right after the end of the semester, right after I submitted the paper or did the presentation or whatever. But later, when I was a professor, actually teaching similar concepts to my students week after week, that is when everything shifted, because I was returning to the same materials 2 or 3 times across a week throughout the entire semester. And when I combine that with the fact that I was actually teaching back the material, back to strategy number 1, that really made those ideas lock in. I mean, even today, I remember a lot of what I taught just because I wasn't trying to cram it all in at once. I was spreading it out and reinforcing it again and again throughout the weeks and throughout the semesters. Now, your brain might be thinking, yeah, must be nice, but I don't have that just naturally built into my career, Paula. I hear you. So how do we make this more friendly for the ADHD brain that gravitates toward the all-in, big push, deadline-driven approach? As I mentioned, the first strategy can be body doubling. So pairing a quick review with a co-working friend. It could even be 5 minutes before the start of a class. You meet 5 or 10 minutes early and you just kind of talk through what you learned the previous class or what you came up with when you're doing the review session or whatever. You could also bring in reminders, okay? Alarms, sticky notes, calendar events. You could pair it with when you're eating lunch, when you're having your morning coffee, after you finish class. I know I had some students when I was still teaching where they would pair their finished class time and then they'd go to the library and they would go through the notes immediately after, right? You could also do, this kind of builds on that, habit stacking, where you connect that review to something you're already doing. So my students that I just mentioned, they would finish class, they'd go to the library and review what they just read. Or maybe you skim the anchors that you wrote in the book you're reading from yesterday. So you wrote some anchors yesterday, the next morning, you review those anchors as you drink your coffee or something. Or you listen to your voice memos where you recapped the concepts, where you retaught those ideas during your commute into work, okay? Something like that. So those are 5 powerful strategies that you can use to help you really retain what you're learning, what you're reading. We had teach it back, adding anchors, using multiple senses, active recall breaks, and then distributed practice, dividing it up throughout the time that you're learning. And I'm curious, what's your favorite way to help yourself remember what you're learning? Do you use any of these 5 that I shared? Do you use something else? Do you like sticky notes, digital notes? What's your approach? Share it in the comments, whether you're here on YouTube or on Instagram. I am at I'm Busy Being Awesome on both. I would love to hear what's really working for our community. Okay, so from there, let's move into our overwhelm types. We just talked through these 5 strategies, which are powerful on their own. And depending on your unique overwhelm type, whether you're the lion, the gazelle, the turtle, or the chameleon, some of these may stick more easily than others. So let's match each type with a specific study approach that tends to feel the most supportive. Again, this is a general guideline. If it's not true for you, not a problem. There's plenty of other supports that we've already talked about, but let's try and do a matching for each one of our overwhelm types. And again, if you don't know which type you are, be sure to take the free quiz. It'll take you less than a minute. Just head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/quiz. You can also tap through the link in the show notes or the captions and check it out. All right, so let's talk about the 4 strategies for our 4 different types to help us really lock in what we're learning. We'll start with the lion, okay? So the signature strategy for our lion here is to have very defined high intensity sprints with clear boundaries. Here's why this matters for our lions. So our lions often go into the work with all the energy, all the drive, all the focus. Remember, the lion is trying to control everything, right? They're trying to create a sense of stability and just get it all done. But because they struggle to honor their capacity, they often keep going, they keep pushing, even when they have nothing left in the tank. And let me tell you from experience, this is not an effective way to learn because there's nothing left in the tank. Literally nothing sticks when you're so burnt out. But the lion just keeps pushing because they don't know how to check in with their body and when to stop. So it's just basically a bunch of wasted energy. So what do? That's where those quick bursts with clear boundaries help, because it allows the lion to channel that intensity without overdoing it. So I personally like to choose a container, whether that's a certain amount of time, maybe that's I'm going to do this for 30 minutes, or it could be a certain number of pages or 1 chapter, something like that. Choose some sort of container that indicates your stopping point, that you've reached done. Okay, that you've done enough. And then after I've chosen that container of time, and let's say I read for 30 minutes, then I use the talk it back approach combined with anchors to help me move through the content and remind myself of what I just read over those 30 minutes. So as a lion, creating those intentional pause points helps us to recharge our energy and also check in to ensure that we are remembering what we're taking in because we still have the capacity to do so. All right, so that's our strategy for the lion. Now for our gazelles. The signature move for the gazelle is to leave yourself breadcrumbs or markers to help tether your attention and focus. Here's why this is so helpful for us gazelles. Gazelles are so quick and creative and easy to pivot from one thing to the next. And also, our gazelles, we can get pulled in lots of different directions. So by incorporating these anchors, whether they're sticky notes or notes in the margins or what have you, these are visible cues that act like those breadcrumbs so that when you come back, you can hop right back in without losing the thread and having to reread everything again. So for example, with each paragraph you read, maybe you write that one keyword or reminder in the margins or in a sticky note. So that way, if your attention goes somewhere else or you need to step away from the work for a bit and come back later, those notes are there to guide you right back to where you left off. Now let's talk about the turtle. So our turtle's signature move is to give yourself the big picture overview and then step into the micro steps. Here's why this is so effective for our turtles. Our turtles often find themselves freezing, putting their head in the shell, because the particular reading or concept that they're trying to understand just feels way too big. And also, the turtles love to see the big picture. They love to have the whole roadmap. So it can get them feeling stuck when the big thing feels too big, so they put their head in the shell, but also they want to see the whole thing so they can see where they're going. Don't worry, I've got you. I know this. So what we can do here is first scan the big picture. That will help calm the brain and go, okay, I know what's coming. Then we're going to zoom in to the first 1 to 2 tiny steps to keep things moving. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're starting a new book that you're reading. It's a new area that you're interested in, or maybe you have to read an article for your exam coming up. What you can do is start by skimming just the table of contents, or if you're reading an article, read the main chapter headings so you can see the general shape of what you're going to read, what you're going to cover, and then choose just one small section on which to focus. So you have that big picture first, and then we go into just section 1 of the article, for example, and anchor it with a single keyword or phrase with each of those different paragraphs. Then, if you start getting too lost in the weeds, you can pull out, zoom back out, and remind yourself, oh yeah, this is where we are in that structure. We're in the second section of the article. Here's that heading, and then you can zoom back in. So you can zoom in and out as you need to help you feel grounded. And then finally, for our chameleons, your signature move is to first clarify your study focus, what you want to focus on, and then borrow some structure. Here's what I mean and why it helps. So as chameleons, we are so good at adapting to the situation and adapting to others. We can do it quite easily. And that can sometimes leave us feeling a little bit scattered in what is actually a priority and what we actually want to study and focus on. So this is why it's really helpful to first set a clear focus for your study session to really direct your energy. So for example, I'm focused in this session on the shift in lyric messaging and musical style between the early 1960s and the late 1960s. That's what I'm focused on. That's what I'm looking at. Okay, so you clarify what you're really studying this session, then connect with others to lean on their external scaffolding, whether it's a study group or body doubling or a live stream or something. That will help keep you engaged, and it creates space to be able to talk through the ideas out loud, which helps those concepts stick. But you've already decided ahead of time what you're studying so that you don't get pulled into focusing on everyone else's main topics instead. Okay, so decide what you're going to study and then join that body double session or a study group on campus or whatever. Do that studying and then pause with breaks to teach one key idea to someone else in that study group. Okay, so there you have it. We have 5 study strategies plus an ADHD twist for each of our different overwhelm types. Remember, this is not about doing all the things. We don't need to do all of them. They can stack on one another, but we don't need to do all the things. It's about experimenting with one at a time and see what feels most supportive for you right now. So maybe you start with teaching back one idea after reading a paragraph, or maybe you start by leaving anchors so you don't lose your place. Maybe you grab a study buddy and build in that external scaffolding and you have someone to talk through ideas with. The win here is finding something small, one small way to help you make that information stick in a way that really does feel supportive for your brain. And remember, what works today may shift tomorrow or may shift depending on the type of information you're learning. That's totally normal. You're not doing anything wrong. This is just your brain giving you new data. Oh, I learn better this way with this type of information. All right, so my invitation for you is to try one of these strategies this week. Play with it. See what works. Notice where you feel any friction. And then we can iterate the next time around to smooth out any of those rough edges and keep moving forward. And if you know somebody who would benefit from this deep dive into different learning strategies for the ADHD brain, would you be a rock star and share this episode with them? This is one of the most powerful ways to really expand the reach of this show and frankly help me in my goal in getting these free strategies to even more busy, awesome brains who need them. So thank you for your help. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for us this week. And if you are ready to take these concepts and apply them to your life, if you're ready to learn how to support your ADHD in a way that works best for you, I invite you to check out today's show notes where you can learn more about how we can work together, both in my small group coaching program, We're Busy Being Awesome, and in one-on-one coaching. Also, if you're ready to discover the unique way that overwhelm presents for your brain, the obstacles that pattern creates, and powerful steps to shift from overwhelm into action today, be sure to take my free quiz and discover your overwhelm type. You can tap through the link in the show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/quiz. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.